You know, we have this idea that great companies start with a single brilliant eureka moment. But the truth? It's usually a whole lot messier and a whole lot more human. Today, we're jumping into the origin story of a dot-com giant. And let me tell you, it's not a story about a perfect plan. It's a winding journey fueled by frustration, friendship, and one very awkward bathroom conversation. And this quote from co-founder Neil Weber, it really gets to the heart of it all. For Weber, who was an engineer, building a company wasn't just about the tech or the money. It was about creating something that would last, something tangible that he could point to and say, I built that. That drive, that desire to build a legacy, that's the real foundation of this entire story. All right, so where does a story like this even begin? Well, every great partnership has an origin story. This one starts in the trenches of a classic 90s tech startup, where two very different people learned the lessons that would one day make them millions. So on one side, you've got Ross Garber. The source literally says he was genetically predisposed to sell things, a classic, driven sales guy from the rough and tumble world of EMC. And on the other side, Neil Weber, a brilliant MIT-trained computer scientist, a self-described nerdy kid who was the very first engineer hired at his company, the salesman and the engineer. It's a classic pairing, right? And the place where they met was this company called Epoch Systems. You can think of it as their apprenticeship. It was a startup with a very specific engineering-driven culture, one that kind of forced these two guys to figure out each other's worlds. And this quote from Ross, wow, it just perfectly captures that culture clash. He came from a world where sales was absolutely king. But at Epoch, the engineers ran the show, and they saw salespeople as, well, a necessary evil. It was in this environment that Ross and Neil started to build this mutual respect, realizing, hey, wait a minute, we actually need each other. We each have a crucial piece of this puzzle. Now, at Epoch, they didn't just learn about company culture. They got their core intellectual toolkit, their secret weapon, really, from their mentor, the CEO, Bob DeVoli. He had this theory, this framework for seeing the future of technology that he would draw on a whiteboard over and over again. It became known as the DeVoli thesis. So this framework is actually incredibly simple, but man, is it powerful. Here's how it goes. First, a new platform emerges, something massive like the internet. Then, people need tools to be able to build on that new platform. But, and this is the key insight, the biggest opportunities, the real money, comes later from building applications that solve very specific business problems for everybody else. Platform, tools, applications. That little three-step formula, that became their compass. And just as they were soaking all this in, the next great platform didn't just show up, it completely exploded onto the scene. The commercial internet went from being this niche academic tool to the biggest business opportunity in a generation. But it's so easy for us to say that now, right, with hindsight. Back then, as Ross remembers it, the so-called smart money thought the internet was a joke. The world already had AOL and CompuServe. Who needed anything else? It really took a contrarian mindset to see the tidal wave that was building. And then, boom, the Big Bang of 1995 happened. In the second half of that year, the signals were just unmistakable, and they came one right after the other. Netscape had its unbelievable IPO. Windows 95 put networking on every single new computer, and Java was born. The game had fundamentally, completely changed in just a matter of months. And if you need just one number to really grasp the sheer scale of what was happening, look at this. $663 million. That's how much Netscape founder Jim Clark was worth on the very first day his company went public. That number sent absolute shockwaves through the entire business world. So what was Ross Garber's reaction when he saw that number in the Wall Street Journal? Well, it's pretty much what you'd expect. It was the moment this theoretical opportunity became a very real, very personal call to action. Okay, so seeing the opportunity, that's one thing. But actually making that leap, quitting a stable job and jumping into the complete unknown of a startup, that takes a push. And for Ross and Neil, that push came from being absolutely, profoundly miserable. See, they were both working at this startup called Dazel, and by all accounts, it was just a toxic place to be, a really difficult CEO. The pain of their current jobs became just as powerful a motivator as the promise of the internet. It's a great reminder that sometimes you're not just running towards a dream, you're running away from a nightmare. Which brings us to, and I am not making this up, one of the greatest, most unglamorous founding moments in the history of tech. It's known simply as the P story. Ross sees his moment, he corners a reluctant Neil right outside the office bathroom, and he just unloads his entire pitch. The Tivoli thesis, the Netscape IPO, this tiny window of opportunity that was closing with every second. And Neil's response, after being trapped in this hurricane of a pitch, it wasn't some grand, inspiring speech. Nope, it was this, a desperate plea. And just like that, a partnership was born. Maybe not gracefully, but it was official. So they did it. They made the leap. They were partners. They were going to start a company. Just one tiny little problem. They had absolutely no idea what that company was actually going to do. And this is so important. They didn't start with a product. They started with a culture. They called it their George Costanza strategy, from Seinfeld. The idea was whatever their miserable old boss did, they would do the exact opposite. They built a constitution based on transparency, treating people like adults, and only hiring A-plus players who are also fun to be around. And this quote from Neil, this says it all. This is the key. They made a very conscious choice to avoid the trap of falling in love with their own brilliant idea. Their vision was to have no vision. Their only plan was to go out, find a real, painful problem that people were desperate to solve, and then build the solution. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you find a billion-dollar problem? Well, this was their process, and it was brilliant. Ross would scan the tech magazines, find an executive who was quoted, and then he'd just cold call them. His opening line was pure genius. "Hi, I have nothing to sell you." Who hangs up on that? It totally disarmed them. And then he would just ask about their biggest headaches and listen for hours. And they did this hundreds of times. So for 3 solid months, they just did this over and over again. Relentless calling, relentless listening. And slowly but surely, a pattern, a theme started to emerge from all that noise. All these different companies, all trying to build their first websites, were all complaining about the exact same thing. They found it. They had found their problem. It wasn't some flashy new piece of tech that people wanted. It was chaos. It was, as the source calls it, a giant project management nightmare right at the heart of the early web. Just getting content from the person who wrote it to the live website was a disaster. So they had done the really hard work. They resisted the temptation to just build something cool and instead found something that was genuinely painful for businesses. They had their problem. They had their mission. But of course, that was really just the beginning, wasn't it? The biggest question of all still remained. How on earth were they going to solve it?